All right, let's make a start. I think we have everyone, at least the basic core group to start with. Makes sense. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ashish Singh, President, Data Products and Operations at Innovaccer. Quick introduction about myself before I introduce the rest of the panelists. I joined Innovaccer about 6 years back, been in the industry for about 2 decades now. Mostly my expertise lies in building the high scale data analytics platform. So that's very briefly me. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself? And then after that?
Sure, Ashish, and thank you. And I have to get one thing out of the way. I'm live from New York City. I always wanted to say that. So anyway, my name is Mike Sutten. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Innovaccer. I wish I was only 2 decades into this, but I've been in quite a bit longer with most recently, before joining Innovaccer over 5 years ago, I was at Kaiser Permanente as the Chief Technology Officer there, and help take them to the cloud, help them build out their data environment. And then before that, and this is mostly just for cocktail hours and interesting stories, I was at the Central Intelligence Agency as a deputy CIO there. And strangely enough, did about the same thing, brought into the cloud business and helped them define their data governance and data structure for what, as you could imagine, is a very large data problem that they're faced with. So thanks for having me, Ashish. Dan?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Dan Bonastelli. I'm calling in from Chicago. I'm Director of Product Management on our in-API interoperability solution. And I've been in interoperability really for about 12 years, starting at Epic, and then from there moving on to a remote monitoring startup called Remedy, where I focused a lot on remote monitoring and home health. And now I'm here at Innovaccer doing work on electronic medical record integration and general interoperability.
Perfect. Mike, Dan, thanks for joining me today. And Mike, before we make a start, do you remember we met 4 years back in San Francisco office for the first time? And we started to talk about our experiences with the data, and that was supposed to be like a 10-minute conversation, but we continued to talk about the problem and our experiences for hours in that case, right? Though we were working in the different industry, different companies, but our challenges were like pretty similar. We were talking about data silos, how the data stewardship is a challenge, how activating enterprise level intelligence is a problem. And putting into the context of healthcare, there is more than ever data is being generated at this point of time, right? We're talking about hundreds of terabytes being generated on a daily basis. There is a growth rate of about 36 to 40% year on year in terms of the data footprint. But we still see that uh, in majority of the cases, that data is like a technical afterthought, right? It's not a strategic first step forward to create a foundational layer and then think about the solution part of it, but it's always kind of a retrospective and the reactive mode on the data part of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Around with my IT colleagues is that sometimes we're our own worst enemy because, as you said, the data keeps growing. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that require to interoperate with each other. And I'm glad we have Dan here to talk about that. But successfully, somehow, the environments. And then what we're very interested in is how to get that data into the analytics space and take advantage of it. I would, Mike can turn off the camera.
Yeah, I think there is some problem with your slide. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, and so I was just going to continue. And what the reason IT has jinxed itself is we make it seem like it's easy and that people can just keep adding more applications and more systems and more data warehouses, and we can just make it connect. When in fact, there really should be some optimization in this data environment because it's tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the size of the organization, that's that's taking up this time, generally, as we all know, in the evening, trying to make the end of the batch window so we can start business the next morning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that has been the case. And if we look at the views that we are getting generally from the industry too, is like on an average, when we talk about a health system, and the health system kind of acquires multiple practices, multiple clinics over a period of time. So there is a lot of legacy that we inherit through those acquisitions, right? And though your IT footprint in terms of the data infrastructure keeps on growing in that sense, in terms of the federated tech stack. And that creates a lot of tech debt. And then we kind of spend time to create that to maintain that legacy and then create a like a foundational layer on top of it, right? And we talk about the stats, we're talking about clinicians. When they talk about the data, it's like not accessible when it's really needed, right? A lot of investment that is going in terms of building that IT or technical stack, but it's still, the problem statement still continues in that sense. So that problem statement still continues, the data footprint is kind of growing. I think the key question that is coming to my mind nowadays with all the AI evolution happening around us, how is that going to be like solved, and how do we kind of put the right step forward to maximize the value from AI perspective as well? Mike, Dan, you have any thoughts on that?
I'll just really quick touch on the point that you were making as well about the growth of data silos that you see, and it's happening more and more. I think we've really hit a point where health systems are acquiring at even faster speeds. I was reading a study that Deloitte put together that in 10 years, about 50% of the current health systems will likely remain. So that shows a little bit of the speed of acquisition and consolidation. And what that means is that 18 plus figure is going to just get higher and higher.
Yep.
And we see that already even as patients too, where you might go access your health system's website, you click patient portal, and then you see 40 or 50 different potential patient portals that you can connect to. So if it's even making its way down to the patient level, the siloed instances of separate EMRs that have been acquired for different practices over the long period of time, for AI, this becomes something much more, in many ways, difficult to solve. If we can't even solve it sometimes for the patient experience at some of these health systems, how do you solve it for an AI system that's meant to exist at the health system as a whole rather than existing at individual practices or clinics? As a health system, you don't want to have distinct AI experiences or worry about the complexity that could arise if you have almost separate AI different intelligences at different at different clinics or practices. It could become very challenging to manage.
Yep.
And just to add to that, Dan, I think a lot of the health systems and payers for that matter are doing a lot to consolidate. They're doing application rationalizations because of your point of through acquisitions they add in redundant applications. But even with that reduction and the rationalization of those apps, there's still hundreds of applications in there. And even if you get down to one EMR, there's hundreds minus one that you have to integrate. So that doesn't solve all your problems because there are the other systems it takes to run a healthcare enterprise.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if we transition with that thought process in terms of what is the importance of data readiness, right? Uh, I was going through a study that came to me recently where we're talking about 85% of the AI projects are not successful because of the poor quality of the data, right? Because if you think of AI is kind of built on two foundational pillars. One, there are LLMs where we're talking about generative AI and all those kind of things. There is a knowledge base that gets fed into LLMs, right? And then on that basis, the LLM is kind of getting the context of a particular domain or a particular kind of organization basis of that data. That's your LLM is going to be as intelligent from a contextual infrastructure perspective as good your data is. Whatever it's being fed from a knowledge perspective, it's going to keep on referencing to that. The second part is whatever the events coming or being generated from these systems, and if the quality of that event is not great, it's not going to give you the relevant outcome overall, right? And that's what's probably causing the impact on these success of the AI projects. So the thought that comes to mind is that we should shift our thought process to consider data as a strategic enabler with this evolution around AI, and not as in like a technical afterthought, right? Because if you're dealing with like 60s of silos, the enterprise level intelligence is already compromised in that sense, because your AI is not going to get access to the 60 of different federated, fragmented kind of data repositories and then create an intelligent layer on top of it. You need to have all of it coming together for a AI to generate the relevant output and outcome in a timely manner for the business to drive the outcome as well. So the foundation of AI uh, is going to be like a strong foundation of AI is going to be built on a strong layer of data, right? So what do you think around that part of it? Like, is there anything that you want to add on that?
I have 2 points I'd like to make on this. And I think the first one, well, they're both related to that, because getting the data ready it's very much what we've been seeing in the last decade of work here at Innovaccer and my works before is the analytic community says they spend 70 to 80% of their time wrangling data, finding data, making sure it's appropriate for the use in their models, whether it's a BI report or whether it's going into some AI logic. And to me, if they're spending that much time doing that, to me, the AI fuse is incredibly short. We've got to get things in place. We've got to try things out. And to me, that spending 80% of your time trying to get ready for something that may not have the business value, because I think AI is more of an experimentation. We're going to try some things. We're going to see what happens. And there's going to be some gold nuggets in there. But to me, speed is another one of the values of getting the business's value as quick as we possibly can. And then related to that is, and part of the reason it takes so long for this wrangling is I've seen organizations, I have customers, Ashish, Dan, we've talked to customers, they're not 100% sure even what their data inventory is. And so they're going out trying to look for data that maybe they went out and bought it and they already had it. And it's as simple as things like reference tables. I mean, not everybody shares the same reference data. And I think if part of this data readiness is an inventory and profile of what you have, and then with the self-service capabilities, I know you're going to talk about, Ashish, because that's your go-to thing, is we can help speed the development of these AI products and help the data scientists as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think too, to add to that is something that we see these new AI forward products that maybe are offering LLMs for medication adherence, for example, or we see a lot of that focus on medications, for example. As these start to become adopted at hospitals and health systems, we may see this variation of some people really find a lot of success, some people do not find a lot of success, and they may be using the exact same product, but if that exact same product is reliant on data sets that have varying levels of quality and certainty, you could have wildly different experiences using the exact same code or the exact same LLM. And I'm sure a lot of people, I've had this experience as well as a patient, of going in and being asked, am I taking X medication, still taking Y medication? And maybe it's an antibiotic from 10 years ago. It's like, no, I'm not still taking that medication. But this is something that I would say the vast majority of my colleagues have experienced. And again, if you're putting an LLM on top of data that doesn't know if I'm still taking a medication, maybe has some conditions that are incorrect. My record, for example, indicates that I have a right knee replacement, which is not true. if you're putting LLMs on top of data that you can't really be confident about, you might not have as good of an experience, and the promise of AI might not be as beneficial as had you felt really confident about that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said makes a lot of sense, Dan and Mike, because that basically creates a trust issue with AI, right? Because underneath data layer is always behind the scene. And what recommendation comes out of AI is something that goes in front of the practitioner and in terms of the patient as well, right? So going back to the same knee replacement part of it, right? If the data is there that there has been like a knee replacement, a physician looking into your records, then right, it's going to be like this person has gone through the knee replacement, and there needs to be like similar kind of some sequence of treatment that needs to be followed because of those previous history as well. I think with that, the transition that we are seeing is data has converted more from being a necessity to an essential element in this developing and evolving age of AI, right? Earlier, the erstwhile thought process was data is the new oil, and that was the industry leading term, and that was used everywhere, right? The data is the necessity and all this kind of thing. But now with AI, which is kind of everywhere, and there is just so much of kind of development, advancement happening in terms of not only from a tech perspective, but from a user persona adoption perspective as well. There are so many companies coming in, there are so many applications being generated, there are so many agents being developed, and in near future is just gonna grow, right? All of it is going to be hydrated with data. And if your quality of data is not right, then God bless AI in that sense, right? The outcomes are not going to be like relevant. And Dan is always going to be treated for the knee surgery in that sense, right? So, so that's the thing. I think that's the new reality that we need to give uh, that undue uh, importance to data now and start to shift focus on the evolution of the data cycle as well. But when you talk about the quality of the data and evolution around that, Mike, do you want to share any experiences that how you have seen the quality of data? I know we talked about this for like hours and hours whenever we meet, but do you want to share something on that based on your previous experiences?
Sure, and yeah, we have talked about this a lot, and I think it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. But I love your analogy of the oil. Why would we be using data that you can't see through? And I think there's going to be a point, with this huge push towards AI and doing all these things, people are going to start realizing that they're going to need to know where this data came from. I mean, using data off the internet, I think maybe even less than a year ago wasn't really an acceptable thought. Now we have people building models on that data. So I do think there is going to be the desire to see that the improvement in quality. And then what I've experienced, and I know I shared this story with you before, is when we went to pull, we upgraded our Clarity environment, and this is at Kaiser Permanente, and we went to improve, move the new infrastructure, get off Teradata, move to Oracle with the Clarity environment, and there were 2 million extracts out of that. And when we went through and did the analysis, well, they're all going after the same 100 tables in Clarity. And then we found out that 88% of those extracts were the same exact data. And then what was funny is we went even further, the engineers on this, and they examined this, and people were doing different calculations for things like standard measures, like the number of members we had, the PM, cost numbers. And these were all very smart data people, but they were all looking at it from a different context. And so what we were getting was results that were inconsistent. And I remember, one of the things to help prove this out, we just asked our executive committee, each one of the EVPs, is how many members do we have? Well, we got 5 different answers. And that's because not necessarily that the data was bad, but it's people, there were different perspectives when they did those calculations. And this is true of every organization. I don't mean to be picking on KP. They're a great customer of ours, but this happens everywhere. And so you've got to focus on what the quality of that data is so that your results can be consistent and that you can make judgments around operational efficiencies, quality scores, all of those types of things in a healthcare setting.
No, no, what you said, Mike, is like absolutely, because I've been talking to a few CDOs and CAOs, and also based on my previous experience, 40x copy is like normal. That's the number of copies of replicas of data that you are seeing. You go and talk to anyone, that's like a known number. Minimum, that's the number that I have heard, that there are 40x copies of the data in that sense. And the number grows because what we have not counted for, the data that resides on the individual machines, that just stays, right? And there are so many copies that is kind of created on like individual systems as well. So that's like a known problem. But uh, Dan, do you want to add anything on this before we segue to the next one?
I think one thing that comes up a lot is it's really we like to talk about how AI is going to sit on top of what we already have, but at least from what I see and what we do on the ground, a lot of our AI projects are actually focused on taking what we already have and improving that quality. So, instead of just building on top of, hey, we have this data set and we can build AI models and we can interact with it. Let's look at that data set in extra detail, use AI and start to ask questions of the data set. Does it make sense that this patient might still be taking this medication? Does it make sense that this might be in place when we know all of this other information about an individual or a population? So AI can be a really powerful tool as well in just regulating quality.
Makes sense. So I think that let's do a quick poll, and I'm sure Vibhor and the team will kind of just share the question. Can we all just quickly share your view that what are the biggest challenges that you are seeing when it comes to the readiness of your organization from from a data kind of quality perspective, that what are the key challenges that you're seeing? Is it the data quality and the consistency, interoperability, or the lack of skilled people? If you can just put your vote there, that would be amazing. And by the time it comes through, and we'll share the poll results as well with the rest of the group, uh, I think it's a very important point that what a data readiness looks like, right? When we talk about now, there is a problem that we all understand. But before we do, we see there are the poll results. When we're talking about the data quality and consistency, not surprised with that, interoperable across systems, lack of skilled, limited budget, regulatory and compliance, and a lack of, yeah. So the top two reasons, let's talk about the top two: data quality and consistency, interoperability across systems. Dan, do you want to talk about interoperability related challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll really quickly talk about some of the progress that's been made because there's been a ton of progress across the industry. The 21st Century Cures Act was just huge. It's opened up data access in ways that were just not possible 10 years ago. So now you have this explosion of applications that are specialized and led by specialists in that particular focus area. And these applications can connect to a huge amount of patient and population data from electronic medical records who are, required by the 21st Century Cures Act to expose immunizations, lab results, vitals, medications, conditions, problem lists, notes, a very deep amount of data in those notes, by the way. And they are able to share these with applications. So we've seen this ecosystem of services and products just bloom and grow pretty much overnight. There's still a lot more room to grow here, though. A lot of the interoperable standards are around exchanging data and accessing data, but there's still more to be done as far as improving the ability for electronic medical records to accept inbound data, for example, notes that are created from outside parties, care management organizations, and make sense of those notes. And if that doesn't get solved, then one of the risks that could come up is overloading medical records with unstructured data. So it's very important that we move forward with some of the standards for electronic medical records to accept data as well. And another thing that we do see coming up and really in effect now is national networks like TEFCA being stood up and being adopted by some of the major health systems and electronic medical records, which is definitely a huge improvement in terms of being able to share data with parties who are part of the continuity of care. I'll pause right there.
No, absolutely. I think there is a lot of advancement happening when it comes to the interoperability aspect, right? And there is like a standardization that is, as in a theme that is being driven across the healthcare segment in that sense. Compliance, adherence, and adoptability of that is going through the path. But there is definitely kind of a clear guideline in terms of how we should be kind of evolving in terms of exchange of the data part of it. Mike, do you want to add any thoughts over there?
Yeah, and I think Dan, for sure, the developments we've seen in the last 5 years have been really quite incredible. But we're not done. I mean, as you all know, the terminology services or the ontologies of these different EMRs or different lab systems is a column in one of the databases for one EMR may have the exact same title in another database in an EMR, but they have two different meanings. And they're going to be put in that message payload, that FHIR message payload. We still have to do the semantic normalization of that data depending on what was the terminology, the ontology that the source system was from. And I've seen some people, what I consider oversimplify that, and they end up with creating some of their own data issues because they think that those column titles are the same. Well, they probably are labeled the same, but the data within those environments are different. And so when we're talking hundreds, literally hundreds of different applications feeding these analytics bases, there are 100 different definitions of a particular column, and they need to be normalized. And that's just not a step that FHIR is going to solve for us today. I think Dan mentioned TEFCA. I think there's some great rules in TEFCA that are going to further along the data management practices to identify that and help correct those.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a very important topic, Mike, that you talked about the reference data management, right? Because the local codes, the local language of the different EHRs, EMRs, and then coming together, it's like English, Chinese, and other languages, right? And for a system to kind of drive the usefulness of that data, it becomes a challenge, right? So uh, I think we talked a lot about the problem statement, and I would like to kind of spend some time to talk about how those challenges can be addressed uh, in future as well. But just a quick one about how do you see the role of executives evolving with this evolution happening around the data and the AI part of it? We have different roles where the CMO is focused on the clinical integrity and the outcome part of it to drive the better patient experience and the patient outcome, while the CIO is focusing on the overall infrastructure, security, and the interoperability part of it. And of course, our colleagues in the CAO organization is focused on how I can deliver the best insights, best NBAs for the better outcome activation part of it. And CDO, which is kind of focused on creating that unified data layer or unified data platform to activate all the use cases, is kind of working together. But we still see those kind of challenges, right? And Mike and you and I have been on multiple calls where we have seen that CAO needs access to the data in seamless manner for them to expand their footprint and the relativeness of the analytics that they are doing. But that has always been seen as a challenge in terms of the constraint way of getting access to the data, right? They are always kind of dealing with a siloed or a fragmented of data part of it for all the right or wrong reasons. But how do you see these kind of roles evolving with all this development happening around us?
Yeah, I think you characterize that real well, Ashish. So in my opinion, I mean, the clash between the CIO, the IT department, whose charge is to protect that data, has been a problem for decades. The analytics folks, their whole job is to get insights into the hand of executives and decision makers. So they're naturally at odds. I think the role, this recent development of this role, this chief data officer, in my mind, is a little bit there to mitigate that. And I think things like, self-service data strategies, getting the catalogs correct and published, doing some of that semantic normalization. I mean, we're all familiar with medallion architecture, but getting data into a state like in what they're calling the silver stage, I think that's something the chief data officer, through, like you've written down here, through the governance and policies and procedures, can make it possible to have some peaceful coexistence. Because this idea of an analyst smash and grabbing, they get a hold of a database, and then there's this black market of this data being copied. I love your story about someone saying, would you say 40 times? I was talking to a senior executive the other day, and they were almost with pride. They had replicated a database 60 times. I go, that's not really something to be proud of. But I do think that the evolution of this chief data office is going to build out some of these things. And I think there's inherent in that is a data architecture that supports self-service data. So analysts, data scientists have easier, quicker access to it. And the access is not through copy and paste. And then the fourth triad of that, of course, is the chief medical officer, who we're all trying to serve and get information into. And they're just like, would you nerds get your act together? Because it is just taking too long. And it doesn't seem that complicated. But of course, we've made it incredibly complex over the years. And especially, it's complicated by the larger the organization, the more people involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think AI has created a belief system that outcome can be achieved much faster. And that's where business is kind of putting a lot of pressure on the IT, uh, where why is this not being activated super fast, right? And the IT is kind of going through this journey of silos, breaking the silos, getting everything together in order to kind of create that foundation layer for the accelerated kind of AI development as well. Now that absolutely makes sense. So how do we go from there in terms of solving the problem part of it? And I think I would like to spend a minute in that sense to talk about how we are approaching it, Mike at Innovaccer, and Dan, feel free to chime in. The basic layer at which we are looking at uh, what good looks like, right? There are few things, foundational elements that needs to be there in a data or the AI platform, right? Fundamentally, you need to have the data inventory, the asset inventory. Like Mike, you were talking about a lot of places we get to know that people are not even aware that what all data assets that they have created, what all data asset is there in their kind of a portfolio or on their platform. That inventory is very, very important so that we have a view that what all is already there. The right tagging of data assets is going to increase the discoverability of data, right? So when someone from analytics comes into picture and they are looking for a certain kind of data attributes, they are able to find that in a very, very simplified manner, right? All of it is managed through the metadata, right? Metadata is leveraged to drive the automation on the platform to ensure that right level of checks are performed, because the quality checks that you want to perform on a pair data versus on a clinical data coming from EHRs are going to be drastically different from each other. So how we built a system that is kind of completely metadata driven, that maintains the specificity of a source and ensures the trust in data with that. A very important thing is that you don't let the bad quality of data go to the dashboards, because that breaks the trust from a business perspective. Suddenly your number is 1,000 and suddenly the number drops to 10 because there was a partial data that got entered into the system and that has flown all the way to the dashboard, all the way to the application. So how? So we crafted a solution where we're saying that if the data is not meeting a particular threshold, it's not going to go to the next level, right? Fail fast is a mechanism, and data sensors are put across all the layers in terms of when you get the data, there are 20 checks that is performed. And then when the data goes to the next layer, there are additional checks performed. And then you go to the layer of unified data model, there are hundreds of business rules that gets performed. So that every layer is preparing the data for the next layer to consume. right? And it's trusting that level of checks that has been done on the previous layer. Along with that, you have the data lineage, you have the data catalog, you have all the circuit breakers, and a very strong governance and the monitoring framework. So that the moment you see a problem coming in, you are not going to discover what the problem is, but the solution itself is kind of giving you a way where you can go to the root cause of the problem, and then you can start to solve the problem so that you can keep your data downtime minimal in that sense. So the good architecture looks like where you have a great interoperable kind of architecture, clearly defined data governance and the stewardship part of it, cross-functional alignment in terms of the data sharing, what kind of access should one get in a seamless manner rather than kind of keeping the data in a very siloed, constrained manner. And of course, activation of the clinically validated AI use cases on top of it. That is uh, our product approach in terms of when we think about how we ensure the data quality on the platform in a very, very layered manner. That is how we kind of look into that. Dan, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, thank you for that really detailed description as well. I will just really briefly touch on a lot of groups that we come across have have been growing and been acquiring. And when you couple that with some of the 21st Century Cures Act um, connected care applications that they might use, you might end up seeing situations where you have a health system with several different EMR instances, and each one of those instances now comes along with 10 to 12 to 15 or so applications that are leveraging those 21st Century Cures Fire APIs. And I think that this is a paradigm that's happened just as a result of how the technology has evolved. But when you have your medical record data siloed and then further siloed to any kind of connected care application that's directly connected to your medical record systems, you not only end up with the original silos of your medical record EMR instances, but that data can get further copied into individual applications that maybe you onboard over time to help with medication adherence or to help with whatever ancillary service that they're providing. And so I think a lot of this just comes back to how can we help get the the data architecture back to a place where you have the level of control, where you can do all of these awesome things like having a clear governance, having quality checks, and centralizing a lot of this. I think a lot of that just starts with how do you consolidate your data, try to eliminate some of those silos and centralize your data strategy into one location so that you don't have to do all of these activities, a dozen or more times. And also, just removing some of that risk of copying your data um, into groups that, are just going to grow and grow and grow. You don't want to lose that data or have it even in in silos that you might not even be aware of.
Yep. No, makes sense. Makes sense. So again, going to level of maturity of like data trust part of it, right? We developed a framework, Dan, and the thought process has been around that how do we kind of take organizations to level 5 of maturity? And I'll just kind of spend a minute to talk about these levels of maturity, how we assess each organization working with us in terms of where do they stand at this point of time and how Innovace are going to take them to level 5 as well. The level 1 of data quality and the data trust maturity is when you have some level of uh, data quality rules in place, which is pretty ad hoc, pretty manual, individual dependent, that and the quality of test cases is completely siloed in that sense. That's the level 1 of maturity of any organization when it comes to the quality of the data or the trust in data. Level 2 is when you move from individual siloed data observability to automated and early detection part of it. Take an example, you have mechanisms in place where you are able to identify the patterns of data timeliness. You are able to identify the patterns of volume of the data that you're gonna get in an automated manner, right? And those alerts and early detection mechanisms are in place to ensure that what you're getting and what is going through your system is of right quality. That's the level two of the data quality and the data trust part of it. Level three is additional advancement that happens in terms of the quality and the check and balances that we do on the data with the addition of the data lineage along with the business context that gets carried across the multiple layers. So up until level two, what organizations are doing is that they're checking everything in different fragments. Like level one is being checked in a siloed manner, level two of the data kind of transformation be checked in like a different manner. But when you ultimately what you're trying to do with a particular data transformation, you're trying to derive an KPI on the dashboard, you're trying to derive an output or an NBA on an application workflow. So that layer of kind of context that how an API KPI is going to be impacted with whatever value that you are generating, that integrated kind of validation framework is something that gets activated at level three. So that you clearly know that if you are not getting a particular value or something non-standard is coming, your end outcome KPI is going to be impacted, and that gets inherited across the layers. And your data foundation is so strong to capture those issues that you know upfront that there is going to be a problem on my KPI if this data is compromised. Level four is where you have centralized governance. That means all the rules that you are building is being maintained at one place, right? And your metadata is being used to define those use cases and the test cases, and it's being activated, deactivated, and maintenance is done centrally in that sense, right? And you have a centralized dashboard to look into all the state, like if you have 15 or 20 of EMRs feeding into your system, or 20 of the pairs feeding into your system, or 20, 30 labs that is kind of feeding into in your data lake, all of that you can see it in one pane. And you can see that real-time view of the data, that what is happening with that data. When is that data gonna arrive to my dashboard? What is the layer when where it's failing, right? And what are the issues that each kind of attribute of data is doing? So you have like a one centralized data ops team who can look into all of the assets that is feeding into your data lake or data platform and ensuring the utmost quality of data at the center level. The last stage, which is level five, where you are proactive in terms of knowing the issues that gonna happen. Think of it as if we see there is a source that is kind of defaulting on data arrival on a monthly basis, you are going to proactively reach out to the customer saying that, or the source saying that, look, we are seeing that you are being delayed on a month-on-month basis or week-on-week basis. Can you just ensure the data arrives to us on a timely manner, right? If you are seeing that some system is kind of changing their schema on a quarterly basis, rather than waiting for the schema failures to happen in production, you are proactively reaching out to the source and saying that, look, we understand you have a quarterly frequency of changing your schema. Can you publish it upfront so that we can accommodate those changes into our system so that you are preventing the failures? That's the utmost level of kind of data quality and data observability, where you are level one, where it's completely fragmented, siloed, a bunch of test cases is driven by the individual brilliance. Level five is all about the system intelligence, where system is kind of being proactive enough to kind of alert your data operations team to say there is going to be like a problem. Why don't you start to take proactive steps as well? That's the journey that we are looking at from a overall kind of a data trust, data observability perspective on the Innovaccer platform. I would love to take up. I'm sure we would. Can we put a poll on the screen as well? That where do you think that where your organization is standing from a maturity perspective? And I would love to understand from this group to understand that what is the maturity level across the organization with the diverse set of people that we have got on this webinar. But by the time the poll results are coming, Dan, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
From an interoperability perspective, I think there's you can add, you could look at each one of those levels and see the implications. When I look at level 5, once you reach a level like level 5 where you have this automated ability to ensure quality, the interoperability becomes something extremely valuable because it's not just, hey, we're able to share our data and to accept data. It's we're able to share this data that you can rely on with 100% certainty. And that's really powerful for services, just traditional services that connect to your system. And it's also powerful for the new batch of AI forward tool sets that you might bring to your platform that, you know, are just going to be so reliant on having their input data be of high quality.
Yep, that makes sense. I think what we are seeing here is majority of organizations in level 3 where we have the practices in place to ensure there is an automated flow of data quality rules. Got it. And it's great to see that there are few in at level 5 as well, where the system is kind of automatically detecting all of it. That's great. Perfect. I think that is that's a good segue in terms of things that we wanted to cover overall in today's webinar. There is a scan code that is available for if you want to do any follow-up conversation, if you want to do a specific kind of deep dive on your particular kind of implementation, will be more I and Mike and Dan will be more than happy to spend time. And it's of course the slots are limited. We are going to do it in no, first come first serve basis. But please feel free to kind of scan this code and block your slots accordingly. And we'd love to get in touch with you. But again, thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. And Dan, thanks for kind of taking time out for this conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.